Happy Sunday, everyone. Today we're talking about Taylor Swift, who I think I've listened to maybe one of her songs, the whole Shake It Off, when that one went popular. I know nothing else about her, but clearly a lot of people enjoy her music. So much so that this past week, when concert tickets were up for sale, there were a ton of problems. I saw social media erupt. People were, taking work off and staying home and rearranging schedules to be available when ticket sales were going online because, there was this kind of blitzkrieg of activity trying to get these Taylor Swift tickets. And it was crazy. I saw people in my social media feed. I had no idea where Taylor Swift fans were suddenly now frothing at the mouth to pick it up, maybe for spouses or daughters and things like that. But a lot of activity. And then, of course, the story that we now know on the flip end is that it was a big train wreck. There was a ton of traffic to the website, lots of interest. Ticket prices, were through the roof. And though I think a couple million people got tickets, a lot of other people were deeply frustrated with the experience. So Ticketmaster starts getting a lot of flack, right? They're the company that was facilitating the ticket sales. And so they start getting a lot of flack, including from Taylor Swift, for how they handled the experience. And Ticketmaster's response, was, well, we had a lot of traffic, this was unexpected, etc. But what I found interesting in the whole thing was that there are now at least three attorney generals of different states, but the plural is weird. You say attorneys general. So there are three attorneys general that are threatening or planning or talking about an investigation into Ticketmaster to investigate their, consumer protection type activities and make sure that they're not, screwing consumers over. These are, top law enforcement officers of three different states now weighing in to say that they're going to investigate things to protect their customers. That was ridiculous because I should say it's ridiculous in comparison because I think of, Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, his little, confidant that was arranging basically arranging all these underage girls to, come hang out with him, right? Where's the list? Where's the investigation? Where are all the other people who were implicated in that activity? Everything's been hush hush and completely suppressed. And so I look at the whole Epstein Maxwell scandal, and where were those attorneys general to investigate? Where were these people quick to kind of pile on and say, oh, we've got to investigate this, right? I think of FTX that just happened. There are some very clear connections between FTX. This is the big crypto exchange that just went bankrupt and, tons of money lost by a lot of investors and so forth. And the guy who ran it, Sam Bankman-Fried, SBF is what he goes by, was the number 2 Democratic donor behind George Soros. This guy was funneling tons of money. And apparently one of the potential connections is that, the government is sending all this money over to Ukraine, like a crap ton of, billions of dollars, hundreds of billions, whatever. We're probably over $1 trillion at this point. Sending all this money to Ukraine. Ukraine is pouring money into FTX. And then this CEO is funneling a bunch of money to Democrats. And so those three things are all independently true. Whether they're connected and this is a pay-to-play scheme or something like that merits investigation. But where are these individuals, trying to investigate those connections? Where do we see enforcement of massive political corruption among the elite who are or were using this guy Sam and his company FTX as a money laundering scheme to personally profit or to politically profit? Where do we see the same outrage and investigation, right? We don't. I think of Hunter Biden's laptop, right? Just the kind of coordinated effort to completely suppress that story, all because the ends justified the means. The ends were do whatever it takes to get Trump defeated, whatever means necessary. Ethics, morality, integrity, journalism, it's all out the window because what matters is the goal. And so where's the investigation, right? Where do we have the the spotlight being shown on exactly what was happening there. Yeah, we have some like independent journalists doing some records requests and light things here, but to me it's ridiculous, right? Taylor Swift and Ticketmaster have a bit of a snafu because there's so much popularity, and suddenly everyone's all aflutter about the issue and wanting to go investigate and make sure that we're following the law. And when there's massive corruption of epic proportions, when underage girls are being trafficked all over the place, when the president's son is very clearly involved in corruption, and likely the president as well, we don't get the same level of inquiry. We don't see the same thing happening. So that is all a lead into today's topic, which is the laws of wickedness. In the Book of Mormon, it talks about how the laws of God were substituted for the laws of wickedness. And this was kind of one of the basic features of the secret combinations and their infestation of the government and their control of the society that soon imploded. Now, this is not the musing about secret combinations today. I have a long list of things I want to talk about, and that's on the list. But this will be adjacent to that issue because it's certainly related to the Book of Mormon and secret combinations in the past. And the criteria for these secret combinations, among desiring power and riches, it was also overthrowing the government. It was trying to, I remember years ago I would hear people say, "Oh, the secret combinations, it's like the gangs, it's like the mafia, it's like the Taliban." I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, have you read your Book of Mormon of the criteria of what it takes to be classified as a secret combination? It is not external threats, it's internal infestation, right? This is something that happens among you, not by some cave dwellers or some, random criminal gang. It's obtaining the sole management of the government. This is Helaman 6. If you take away nothing else from this particular musing, dedicate 15 minutes and go sit with Helaman 6 and read through it a couple times and ponder its application to today, because this is a powerful, it's Helaman 6 and Ether 8. Those two are kind of like there's a lot of like 3 Nephi 11, I've talked about before, right? There's two purposes of the Book of Mormon, and in our church, we basically ignore the second one. The first is to testify of Jesus Christ and talk about individual salvation and how we should individually govern our lives. Check, we're good there, we focus on that. But we almost completely ignore the second purpose of the Book of Mormon, which is to serve as a warning manual, right? If the first priority is to tell us how to govern our individual lives, the second priority of the Book of Mormon is to tell us how to govern our societies, our communities, how to manage our affairs between one another. It's this warning manual of what has historically happened and what will happen today, and we almost completely ignore it. And so one of the things we ignore is the fact that these secret combinations, these Gadianton robbers, as it says in verse 39, Helaman 6:39, that they obtained the sole management of the government. This is their MO. They desire power and authority and riches and control. They don't do it by throwing bombs or fighting external wars. They do it by internal infestation, by taking over, by obtaining sole management of the government. There's a quote I love from President Gordon B. Hinckley, where he talks about this secondary purpose of the Book of Mormon that we so often neglect. And he talks about how, this is the quote where he says that the Book of Mormon is more inspired and inspiring than the morning newspaper. Of course, he said this back at a time when newspapers were still a thing. But here's what he says. The people succumbed, he's describing the Book of Mormon era people. The people succumbed to the wiles of ambitious and scheming leaders. Check. We've got that today. Who oppressed them with burdensome taxes. Check. Who lulled them with hollow promises. Check. Who countenanced and even encouraged loose and lascivious living. Check. These evil schemers led the people into terrible wars. Check. That resulted in the death of millions. Check. And the final and total extinction of two great civilizations in two different eras. I think that one's in progress. I think we have the internal infestation going on, the slow decay of our society, following the exact pattern that was outlined here. So that quote, it's like Here's these things that happen. Here's these warnings that were being given. Check, 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 check. All those things are happening today. And so that's why Ether 8 becomes suddenly important, where it's like God commands you when you see these things to awaken to your awful situation and to suffer not that these murderous combinations get above you. And we're just completely ignoring that counsel in the church. Okay, so by obtaining positions of political power, as we just read in verse 39, okay, what are they doing with that? What are they trying to do? Well, they're trying to, I've talked before about Satan's the war in heaven, so-called, right? And how the fight was not to compel righteousness. Satan doesn't want to force everyone to be good, right? He wants the eat, drink, and marry option. He wants to promise people, hey, come follow me, do whatever you want, and I'll save you. It'll be fine, right? And so that's, I've talked before on that. I've written about this in Latter-day Liberty and in Christ versus Caesar. But the point is that Satan's approach is to undermine agency by undermining accountability. That the point is to let people do bad things and get away with it, right? To murder and, for Cain to slay Abel and to get his sheep because he's jealous and get away with it, right? And Satan's promise that, it'll be fine, I'm the God of this earth. And so, he became Master Mayhan and creates this murderous combination, and that's what, the records and the patterns continued throughout world history, and they continue today. So in verse 21 of Helaman 6, it says that these individuals in these Gadianton robbers, secret combinations, whatever you want to call them, that they would they pledged something. They pledged that they would protect and preserve one another in whatsoever difficult circumstances they should be placed, that they should not suffer for their murders and their plunderings and their stealings. That's the whole point. The whole point of obtaining the sole management of the government, of getting in control of it, is to let your buddies off the hook to get away with all the bad stuff, to substitute the laws of God for the laws of wickedness, to be governed by whatever you want to do and to get away with it. So in verse 24, it talks about that they got rid of the laws of their country and instead were able to do whatever they wanted according to the laws of their wickedness. In Helaman 7, so in the next chapter, it says that they let the guilty and the wicked go unpunished because of their money and are held in office at the head of government to rule and do according to their wills. Okay, so the laws of wickedness, Taylor Swift and Ticketmaster. Who gives a fling and rip, right? Where's the same attention given to Jeffrey Epstein and all his uber-connected buddies that have been trafficking in underage girls and doing all kinds of nefarious deeds, and they're all getting away with it because the list is buried and no one's talking about it, and they've probably killed, some people who have tried, and you look at people in the past who try and speak up or speak out who are in connection, and suddenly they have an accident, they get Clintoned. And, you look at this, and this is very much happening today. There are corrupt people in power who are literally getting away with murder and with theft and plunder. And you look at FTX and Ukraine and the Democrats, right? All these things like, Hunter Biden's laptop. It's all, and so many more examples, right? It's evidence of the laws of wickedness being what's really governing this process. I think of like the bank bailouts, that were especially problematic during 07, 08 around there, but there have been plenty of other similar financial bailouts since. Basically, again, it's saying you won't be held accountable for your actions. We will bail you out. You can do whatever you want. You can loan people money you shouldn't have. You can leverage yourselves like crazy. You can misrepresent things. You can lie. You can steal. You can move things around in different budgets. Oh, and at the end, you won't actually be held accountable. No one will be fired, and the government, the taxpayers, will bail you out. So I think that's another great example. I think vaccine immunity, telling vaccine manufacturers, do whatever you want, produce whatever you want. You can't be sued. Taxpayers will bail you out, right? Any claims made about vaccine injuries, if any award is given, the government will just pay for it. Taxpayers will pay for it. We're going to give you immunity, right? So you don't actually have to be held accountable for your product. I think of The NSA, like right down the road here from where I live, is the NSA building that Orrin Hatch facilitated bringing to Utah, right? Where they're storing this musing and any texts you send me and any emails I send you and our phone calls and all the data that they're collecting. I think of the director of national intelligence testifying before Congress that they were not collecting all these things, and Edward Snowden watching that unfold and, pushing him more towards leaking what he did because he saw them absolutely lying and getting away with it. And laws of wickedness, right? I think of like COVID amnesty, this whole idea in the past few weeks of like, oh, let's forgive and forget. We didn't know any better. We had the right attitude. We had love in our hearts. We were trying to do the right thing. Never mind that we, destroyed your business and killed your, let your grandma die on her deathbed without loved ones around her and shut down your church and fined you and everything else. Oh, but let's forgive and forget, right? Let's not hold anyone accountable. Let's not fire anyone. Let's not investigate the Wuhan lab leak. Let's not look into that. Sweep it under the rug. You're fringe crazy people, right? I'm an upstanding person that sure gets kickbacks from the pharmaceutical industry for, pushing and recommending all this stuff, but like it is total absolute garbage. And we are very much living in Helaman 6 right now. That the laws of wickedness are what are governing. And that there are people getting away with plunder and murder in the government and their allies, and they're not being held accountable. Because of their, power and money and influence. Now, what's interesting to me about this whole thing is that they can't get away with it. Like this is a small number of people we're talking about, right? This isn't just like all of society is murdering and getting away with it. This is like a minority group of people who are wielding power and benefiting from it. And so if you look at the Book of Mormon people, when they were going through these two societal collapses as a result of these secret combinations, why were they going along with it? Why did they tolerate it? Well, we read that, there was basically a propaganda campaign. So this is in verse 38, Helaman 38. It says that the Gadiantans seduced the more part of the righteous until they had come down to believe in their works and partake of their spoils and to join with them in their secret murders and combinations. And so I think what I take away from this is that the people welcomed them with open arms. I mean, they financially benefited from what they were doing. They elected them and put them in various offices of power. And their own wickedness and carnal desires were, like President Hinckley said, loose and lascivious living. I don't think that's just sexual looseness. I think it's ethical and moral looseness as well. And that everyone's justifying one another. When I worked on Christ versus Caesar, I talked about how there's all kinds of justifications for participating in Caesar, for using, benefiting from taxes, for using the political process to force on your neighbor what you want, to basically implement enmity between neighbors and institutionalize it through the government and call it the political process and, your civic duty and all the rest, to normalize behavior that at its core is the institutionalization of enmity. It is weaponizing Caesar's coercion against one another. It is anti-Christ. It is anti-love. It is in total violation of God's commandments. And that's what's happening here with Latter-day Saints today. That, again, if you read Helaman 6 with the intent to try and understand what's happening today, you then have to ask yourself, how are we as members of the church, how are we Christians being seduced, right? The more part of the righteous. How are we being seduced until we had come down to believe in their works? It's been a while since I read this, so I'm going to be fuzzy, but in the Book of Mormon, when Amalickiah is going after the Nephites, and he's like, "Oh, just come down from the mountain, and I'll what was it? It's like I'll let you take over my army, right?" And then he comes down, and they kill him, and now he has the army, and all this subterfuge and deception. But I bring this up because that general, whoever it was, I can't remember who he was talking to. He was at the top of the mountain. He had the strategic advantage, right? Amalickiah had to say to him, "Hey, come down." Like he couldn't go up. They were kind of stuck. They were in a weak position. And so he had to come up with this deceptive way to get the guy to come down. And that's when he was able to get him. So I share that because here we're reading in Helaman 6 that the more part of the righteous had come down to believe in their works. I see this as like a falling from grace. You're in a position of strength and strategic advantage, but you come down to believe in the works of these Gadiantons. You're seduced by the, free college and subsidized, interest rates and park down the road for your kids to play soccer at and, free library for you to get all the books you want. And you're seduced by all of these things that are based on Caesar's coercive, taxation-based, confiscatory control over, men over their neighbors, right? It is very seductive. I mean, it's like government schools. Brigham Young and early church leaders warned against what were called free schools at the time, because all these Gentiles, so-called, were moving into Utah and they're setting these things up. And church leaders like, no, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And they're warning and they're saying all these bad things will happen. But the people were seduced because it was free. Here's Caesar taxing us already. We may as well take advantage of it. It's easier. It's the path of least resistance. I'll just send my kid, all day. It's daycare, basically. And yeah, they'll turn out all right and they'll learn some things. And, surely not too many bad things will happen. But it's super convenient for me, the dad or the mom, to just say, see you later. That quote from the evangelical pastor, I can never remember his name, where he's like, can we as Christians really be surprised when we send our kids to Caesar's schools and they return home as Romans? We can't be surprised, and yet we do it because we're seduced. We're seduced by the arm of flesh. We're seduced by gods of stone and steel. We worship them. We idolize them. It's seductive. We crave the security blanket of big weaponry and America and military and flags and pageantry and all the rest that gives us this secure feeling of being protected. And so we're kind of like the wicked Nephites saying, oh, our city can never burn down. You crazy prophets, look how great we are. Look how great our city is. It can never happen. And then it happens. And so we idolize the arm of flesh that can't actually protect us because it's seductive. We, the more part of the righteous, are seduced to come down, to believe in their works and partake of their spoils. We don't have to be involved in murder. We don't have to actively be stealing, but we are partaking of their spoils, the byproduct of their activities, what they are doing and producing or collecting, gathering, stealing. We're partaking of it. We're joining with them. So we are not immune from this, and I don't think the Book of Mormon was written for everyone else. It was written for us. And I don't think our church is immune from this. I think, in fact, it's written directly for us. And that we, the more part of the righteous, have also been seduced, and that most members of the church don't even know about it. They are partaking in these spoils, and they've come down to believe in these works because of the propaganda campaign, because of Caesar's propaganda. They don't know any better, these most members of the church. We don't talk about it in church. We don't talk about it in gospel doctrine. We don't really dig into this much. The brethren aren't really talking about it anymore. Some in the past have tried. They were largely ignored. And so God's pattern in past scriptures is that when efforts have been made by prophets and the people reject them, then, the prophet's mouth is closed and we get a lower standard. And we're condemned. We're damned. Which is in part why it says in the Doctrine and Covenants, right, that we are under condemnation and will remain under this condemnation until we remember the new and everlasting covenant, not only to say, but to do that which is written, right? It's not just, as it says here in Helaman 6, to believe in their works. It's to also partake in their spoils. It's belief and action. We're believing that it's okay. We're believing in Caesar's justifications. We're believing that it's normal. We're believing that you can be a good member of the church and also, partake in all these Caesarian corrupt processes. We believe that, we can be good members of the church and send our kids to government schools and everything will be okay. We believe in these cultural, I may start pronouncing it like that from now on. Not cultural. This is cultural type of Caesar-based practices. We believe in these things. So we believe, and then we do. We partake in their spoils. We participate in their processes. We actively contribute. We financially benefit. We've been seduced. So we're condemned because the condemnation isn't lifted, again, as it says, until we believe and do according to that which is written. Looking at the Book of Mormon, the New Covenant, heeding its warnings, not just believing in it, but acting according to what has been said. Quite the opposite of these Nephites in the past and Latter-day Saints today, who are seduced into believing and doing according to the secret combinations. So the laws of wickedness are what we're governed under. And sure, we can support the Constitution and, vote for better laws and change the law to be better and all the things. But at the end of the day, if the political process is built such that those in positions of power and with money can get away with murder, and they're not going to be held accountable, and prosecutors are not going to prosecute, and investigators are not going to investigate, right? Because certain people are untouchable and their buddies are in the government and can make things go away, right? Then we don't really have a system of justice. We don't really have the laws of God and the laws of our country being adequately followed. They're highly subjective. I mean, the laws of our country are such that if I'm pulled over for speeding by a cop, he should give me a ticket. But oftentimes that doesn't happen. Well, first I have a radar detector, which has saved my bacon in more than one experience. But, if I'm pulled over, that law enforcement officer has discretion. And then if I am cited or arrested or whatever, then the prosecutor has discretion. He could drop the charges, right? And then the judge, or the jury at times have discretion. We don't have a system in which things are like ruthlessly enforced all the time. Otherwise, everyone who speeds would get a ticket always and forever. There's a lot of discretion and flexibility built in, which from a utilitarian approach makes sense, because everyone would be in jail. Yeah, if you haven't read it, a great book is 3 Felonies a Day by Harvey Silverglate. His contention was that the average American commits 3 felonies a day because there's so many laws on the books that it's like nearly impossible not to break some of these laws on any given day. But the point is that there's a lot of flexibility and discretion in the system, which means that the Gadiantons, when their buddies are the district attorney or the attorney general or the local prosecutor or the whoever, right, that those individuals can make things go away. They have the discretion to just drop a case, to not pursue things, to lessen the charges. I mean, Epstein got his hands slapped relative to everything that he was doing before he supposedly killed himself, even though I really don't think he did, right? That is the reality we have to confront and face. And so the question becomes, what do we do about it? Because if we are living in a highly corrupt political system where the elite and the powerful and these murderous cretins can get away with it, and where they're plundering through money laundering schemes and they're, getting social media outlets to suppress stories that would, prevent their political power and everything. Like, if that's the society that we live in, I think we have to disabuse ourselves of the notion that we live under the rule of law, that we have a system of constitutional government that's like ideal in some way, because it's not. It's for us poor people, us plebs, we're gonna have laws ruthlessly enforced against us, right? Because we don't have the same connections that a lot of these people do. And a lot of these people, they come from the same universities and the same secret societies and have the same handshakes, and they're all part of this crazy network of organizations and things that, again, we'll get to at some point and talk about in more detail. But that's the point for today, is that for all the controversy that Taylor Swift and Ticketmaster created, and the attorneys general now investigating to protect consumers and enforce the law, it just shows how asinine it is, how uneven our system of government is. I mean, look at the death penalty, right? Like, if you're poor and black, then you're like infinitely higher chance of getting executed, getting the death penalty for the same crime committed by, some rich white person, because they can afford lawyers or have connections, or, their law school buddy is the whatever, right? And, there's a wink and a nod and a lot of unstated stuff that happens. And so in the aggregate, over and over again, you look at these cases, and the people with connections are able to leverage those connections for their own personal and professional benefit. I mean, that's just human nature, right? We're all going to leverage whatever connections we have. Whereas those without connections are just screwed. And so I think the same thing here with the secret combinations. These people have a lot of connections to powerful people. They've donated to them. They've made money for them. They've given kickbacks to them, whatever. They've made a lot of connections that they can leverage to be able to get away with theft and murder. That is the system of government we have now today, whether we like it or not. And our biggest failure as Latter-day Saints is that we have not taken seriously the many warnings we've been given about it and the commandment to awaken to our awful situation and the reality of what we have. The first step of pursuing solutions is to even acknowledge the problem. And if we can't do that as a church community, if we can't have open conversations about these problems for fear of whatever, because it's not, politically or culturally appropriate, or we're worried about being canceled, or whatever, then our state is awful indeed. If we, the people who've been warned about this and commanded to do something about it, are not even talking about it, we're not considering it, we're not thinking about it, it's not top of mind, it's not polite conversation. Granted, it is Thanksgiving week, so be a fun opportunity to talk about this across the dinner table and have one of those deep political discussions that we always like to have at Thanksgiving dinner. So for those of you who did get Taylor Swift tickets, congratulations. We all hate Ticketmaster, but man, if there's going to be any investigations, can we please go after Jeffrey Epstein's list? Can we please look into FTX and the Democrats? Can we please look into Hunter Biden and his dad and all this massive political corruption? The fact that it doesn't happen is just a clear indication of the disease in our society and the decay, and the fact that, as President Hinckley said, that's like the last thing, right? Ambitious and scheming leaders, oppressing with burdensome taxes, lulling them with hollow promises, countenancing and even encouraging loose and lascivious living, leading people into terrible wars, the death of millions, and then finally, the total extinction of two great civilizations. And that's the last thing that remains. I think we're in this slow decay that we've been warned to try and do something about. There's all kinds of great scriptures that I'll talk about at a future point in the Doctrine and Covenants talking about this, that we need to waste and wear out our lives in bringing to light the hidden things of darkness. When was the last time you heard that scripture in church? When was the last time we've talked together in our church community about the fact that we are supposed to be wasting and wearing out our lives bringing to light the hidden things of darkness? Well, what's hiding in darkness? Should we talk about it? Maybe. So maybe the place to start is Thanksgiving dinner table. You guys have some fun conversations. Let me know how it goes. I'll do the same, and we'll see you next week.